In many parts of the world, it's common practice that people will keep their own name when they get married. Yet in some places, there's still a deep tradition that the woman must change her name to that of the man's because her name is of less worth. How do we have conversations to open this up? How do we have conversations to talk about creating equality between partners when they get married? And also, too, is it important to learn how to have these conversations before you enter into a long-term relationship?
Welcome to eSHAIR.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. eSHAIR.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning eSHAIR.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to eSHAIR. Here we discuss, promote, and share the benefits to all from living in an egalitarian society, including men. Inaccurate propaganda leads some men to believe they'll miss out with equality. The reality, suppressing women is detrimental to men. Creating a world where everyone contribute equally makes everybody better off. Now, today it's my great pleasure to welcome Melania Joy, founder of Married Name Choices. Melania began Married Name Choices to help women understand their worth, identity, and place in society is equal to the man she's about to marry. Welcome, Melania.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to talk to you.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I apologize for keeping you up on your Friday night. It's my Saturday morning, but do you want to start with a little bit about your background and what led you to doing what you're doing to help others?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks for asking. So, like you said, I am the creator and founder of Married Name Choices. It's a project that I'm working on to help women. I'm in the United States, but this does apply around many parts of the world, but to help women to understand that it's important for her to at least discuss her married name choices with the man she's about to marry, and to go as far as to say to negotiate her married name choices with her husband. And the reason behind that is because I feel that her worth and her identity and her family history is as important as the man she's about to marry. So I started this project to bring awareness to women about the choices that they have when they get married, and then also to provide support and education, a little bit of humor, and a platform so they can learn more about it.
Fantastic. And you also worked in journalism, is that right? And you're a behavioral
That's right.
psychologist? What?
That's right. Yes, I've spent 20 years in the journalism and communication fields. And so I have a lot of interviewing skills, researching skills, and I love to talk to people about what's really important to them through my interviewing and writing articles, publishing.
Fantastic. And from that perspective, I mean, you had spent a lot of time working in journalism. And what was it that drove you to want to make that? Because to do what you're doing, to make that change, we get into a habit of, we have a career and it's quite safe and comfortable. But then to step
Mhm.
out and do something different, there's usually some sort of motivation or some passion that drives you, because
Mhm.
it can be quite scary to step out and do something different. What was that driver for you?
Well, I'm not as brave as you think. I didn't completely leave my day job to start this, but I've always had this nagging feeling underneath about, why don't men change their names? And
Mm,
growing up in the society and the customs that I have here in the United States, it's more been, it's tradition. That's just the way it is. That's what everybody else has done. But I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to find out not only why are we still clinging to this tradition so intently, but also how does that shift the behaviors between the men and the women when women are raised to just be expected to give up their name. And when you really look at your name and the identity that's engulfed in that name, it's really a lot to say, hey, you need to give up part of who you are when you get married. So to I think it's just really interesting to go on that deeper level and to look at the different emotions and the different stereotypes and the unconscious biases that have been ingrained in us and kind of bring them to the surface and have really interesting conversations about them.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Mhm.
And such a good motivation to do that because, like you say, a person's identity and this feeling, is there a strong feeling that a person must do that when they really don't want to? Is that from your research in working with people that a number of people don't want to, but they feel that they have to?
There's a lot of women that I've talked to, there's a lot of pressure. It seems that the this younger generation now, many of the men will say, it's your decision. Whatever you want to do, I want to support you. I want to be respectful of your decision. I want this to be something that you're comfortable with. But the women that I've talked to, because we have choices now and because we're accustomed to knowing that we can keep our maiden name, we can hyphenate our name, we have choices, but the women are starting to feel pressure that the women that I've talked to, that they don't want to make this decision all on their own. They
Um,
want it to be a decision that the couple comes together and really lays out all the different options and decides from a very level playing field what's best for us, not just what's best for me or what's best for you, but what's best for us, us as a couple and our future family, if they're planning to have a family. So some women that I've talked to have felt a lot of pressure that it's more from their in-laws or even from their parents, kind of like, oh, they're not really as comfortable with it,
okay, yeah,
but
yeah.
kind of moving more towards this needs to be a decision that the couple makes together, kind of like, let's pick a wedding date together, let's pick a venue together, let's pick a house together, well, let's pick a married name together, and this is something that the two of them can come together and decide what's best for them.
Because I was listening as you were talking there, I was wondering, and being a male, that it's talking is not my strong suit, although contrary to my ability to hold interviews. But generally, outside of this, I'm happy to sit behind my lawnmower and do a Forrest Gump and just go backwards and forwards and not talk to anybody. Um, and but just so I was wondering, when you were talking about that, one, is it more a case of the women want to have that discussion and want to talk about it, and the guys are, yeah, I'm okay, and genuinely they're okay, whichever way you want to go, I'm okay. But
Mhm,
then you led into, there's the pressure, the cultural pressure, certainly from the
mhm,
parents and maybe grandparents, and maybe, or I think you mentioned uncles and aunties as well, that this is not something you do. And really what they're
mhm.
looking for is support for whichever way they decide to go. And is that more about the conversation they need to have with their future spouse to say, hey, let's do this together as a joint thing? Is that more what it's about?
Right. Yeah, that, and the other option that really doesn't come up that often is why not take her name and
Yeah.
put that option on the table too, instead of should she change her name or shouldn't she change her name, or um, you know it's not just about her, but also one of the options is maybe it would be a good idea to take her name instead of his name,
Yeah.
or maybe it would be a good idea to come up with a new name. One of
That's
my
another option, definitely.
it's a very small fraction of people do it, but it is something that could really be fun for a couple, to come together
Definitely.
and say, hey, you know what, I maybe we should just, it's our new life together, it's our new family together. Maybe they both love, I don't know, skydiving or something like that, and they could come up with the last name. I don't know what would be a skydiving name, like free falling or parachute, or I don't know, something fun like that. It would be a fun, definitely bonding situation.
Mm,
Um, but but then also, I'm sure people do this all the time. It's like, oh, because I do get so excited talking to you that
yeah.
it's like, shoot, where was I going with that whole thing? um, but then also too, there's the tradition of, obviously, like I've been talking about, dropping the woman's name and taking on the man's name. But sometimes that's not the best thing. For example,
Yeah.
I wrote an article that said, I love him, but I don't want my name to be Grosswiener. So when there's when you have a name, a family name that's been passed on, but it's really not a name that maybe a woman wants to marry into, that might be a good opportunity to say, well, hey, you know what, maybe we should take your name, or maybe we should come up with a different idea. So really exploring all those non-traditional ideas, but doing it together as a couple. And, again, giving both individuals the power to come together and make a decision together.
Yeah, I think that's really important. What you're underlying there is the having being able excuse me, being able to have that discussion, because as we know,
Mhm.
and you'll know from being a behavioral psychologist, is that a relationship, the strength comes from that communication, being able to talk about these things and develop that skills. And if you can
Right.
do that early on in the piece, you've got more chance of success and staying together. Um,
Yes.
so that
And
seems like,
creating that bond together.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly, and that's part of
Mhm.
that communication does create that bond, being able to have um, those discussions. What before I
Right.
wanted to talk about the identity bit. Before we get to that, I wanted to sort of explore the cultural aspect of that, because, like as you say, in America, it's very much changed the name.
Mhm.
Certainly in Australia, it's not so much here, but there's still that underlying thing. But I have friends from Cuba, for example, and well, I haven't been to Cuba, but from what they tell me, it's standard practice that the woman doesn't change her name; she keeps her own name.
Right.
Um,
Mhm.
is there, I mean, from that perspective, is it more, I don't like using the term Western, but is it more a Western thing that happens, whereas other countries it doesn't seem to happen? I know in some Asian countries it doesn't seem to happen so much.
Right. Right. Yeah. Different countries and different cultures certainly have different traditions. And for example, well, actually in Japan, they actually just passed a law saying that a married couple has to have the same last name. They can choose the woman's name or the man's name, but the couple has to have the same last name.
Really?
And then in Quebec, which is kind of interesting because it's not all of Canada, it's just in Quebec, women are not allowed to change their name when they get married.
Oh, not allowed to.
So no, it's an
Wow.
actual law. So I think it's really fun and interesting that in America we have the choices,
Yeah.
and sometimes choices just adds to the pressure of making a decision. But it's wonderful that we have choices, and we don't have laws telling us that you have to take the other person's name, or you're not allowed to take the other person's name. But it hasn't always been like that in the United States. There were laws even up until the 1970s and 1980s, not so much requiring women to take the her husband's name, but a lot of things, like sometimes she couldn't get a driver's license if her name didn't match her husband's name, or get a credit card, or vote. Or even in the 70s, women were really having a hard time as they started keeping their birth name as their own
Mm.
married name, their employers would say, no, I'm sorry, you're married. I'm only going to put the paycheck in your husband, like in your name with your husband's last name.
Really?
So there's been a lot of legislation that women, people, but mainly women, have had to fight for. So we can't have these choices.
Mm.
So now we do have a lot of choices, and there's no laws saying that men can't change their names, and there's no laws in the United States anymore that women have to change their name. So we're left with a lot of choices,
Yeah.
which is wonderful. There's no, like we're saying in other countries, there are laws requiring one way or the other. So
Yeah.
we have choices.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And again, that's really the point, isn't it? That to recognize that you have the choice and have the ability to choose, which is something I talk
Hmm.
about a lot in the work that I do. Rather than saying, what do you want? We say, what do you choose? To actually remind you that it's your choice. Because a lot of times when you
Uh-huh.
ask someone what do they want, I don't know what I want. But I reframed it to, what do you choose? And they go, oh, I have a choice. And yeah, you do have a choice. It's your choice.
You
You
have a choice,
certainly
right?
in a free,
Yeah.
like if you live in a country where you have the freedom to choose, like America, you can make your own choices. To
Uh-huh.
recognize you have that choice, and that's where it's lovely to see that you're encouraging people to have these conversations about a topic that's not, it's kind of just accepted, but so it could be a
Hmm.
difficult topic. And I love the fact that you're encouraging people to talk about something that's difficult,
Right.
because as
Right.
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where, sometimes the traditions and the cultures um, get a little bit difficult, because if you're not given the opportunity to look at a tradition and say, you know what, that tradition doesn't fit anymore, let's evolve from it, or let's toss it out and start a new one.
Mm.
When people, either through family, through politics, through just social culture, when they keep you so stuck in those traditions and those cultures, it can be really harmful to some of the groups that tradition or that culture is being forced upon. I mean, I'll keep it light here, but on some of the wedding traditions,
Yeah.
for example, there's, um, you know, brides still love to carry bouquets, but the the origination of a bouquet is back when people, and then women, didn't have the opportunity to take a bath all the time, so they kind of like they stunk, and so the
That's
bouquet
true. That's
was
well, that's
more they the bouquet was like pungent herbs and things that really could hide the body odor. So we've kind of grown out of the fact that the bouquet does not need to hide the body odor anymore, but we still love the part of the tradition of carrying flowers. Now it's not, herbs and vegetables and things like that to mask the odor, but we've evolved that tradition into something that works for today, and that is something that we want to carry on today. And I think that's something that a lot of couples are doing. They are starting to look at each one of these wedding traditions and say, hey, does it fit our personality? Does it fit our lifestyle? Do we want to keep it? Even the bouquet toss and the garter, taking the garter off of the bride and throwing it to the single men. The origins of those, that it was more about consummating the marriage, and things that those traditions no longer apply. So those
mm,
traditions have kind of evolved into something different, or something that fits with our society now. In fact, some couples I've talked to, they just don't want to do the whole bridal toss, because women are saying, hey, you know what, why are you going to single me out as a single woman? Maybe I like being a single woman, so I don't want to have to be dragged onto the dance
yeah.
floor and have the possibility of catching a bouquet. So they're starting to do something like just calling all the children up, or they're even doing like teddy bear tosses to bless the children. So they're really looking
Oh,
at
that's
each one of
cool.
the traditions and saying, is this best for us? And is this what works? So it seems to me like it's a natural progression to also then look at names and find a name that works best for them too.
Yeah, I love that
Mhm.
because I mean what you're talking about there is evolution, and if you look
Mhm.
throughout the history of the planet and probably other planets, whatever, but certainly our planet, if the species is not evolving, it's dying. And what you're talking about is that let's evolve, continue to evolve with what
Right.
we've got. And
Mhm.
that's it's interesting too. You're talking about how there was, some of these traditions do relate to consummating the marriage, and I only because it was I can't remember where it came up, but it was about being able to annul a marriage if you haven't consummated it. But I in Australia, I know that has been it's not part of the legislation, not part of the Marriage Act. I looked it up recently, and that's not a basis. So you
Mhm.
can't go, oh, she wouldn't have sex with me, and I want to annul the marriage, or vice versa.
Uh-huh.
So it's interesting how that has all evolved and changed, and it's nice that you're
Right.
having these discussions to talk about this this evolution of not only um, of saying what's right for you, which is important.
Mhm.
Just because something was doesn't mean that it's something that you should do. And
Mhm.
I find because we talk to a lot of people, especially women, with getting stuck into a career that they don't want to do, but that they were and making that choice to step out from that career. So I love these
Right.
discussions that you're having. Fundamentally, that you're encouraging people to talk about what's right for them, and I
Right.
think that's got to be good for society. The
Right.
Yeah, so the other
Yeah, I
part I
agree.
picked up on that was, and then something I learnt too late in life, which applies not only in your relationship, but business relationships, and it's what I term as no amount of skill fixes a poor partner choice. And I would imagine having this discussion up front before you get married, if the person's not wanting to have this discussion, not wanting to talk with you about it, that's a good indicator that we might have some problems later on, and maybe you might want to consider, whether this is the
Right.
right thing to do. How much
Right.
of that, from your perspective, having these discussions helps people better clarify what's important for them?
Right, definitely. In fact, I've been talking to some women like, when should you start having these discussions? Is it something that you should have while you're in just dating, or do you wait until you're engaged, or do what when is the best time? And more women are saying that they feel this is something that once you're in a long-term relationship and you kind of start throwing out, hey, one day maybe we'll get married, or one day, you know start talking about married names at that point,
Mm.
because it does sometimes bring up a lot of feelings. In fact, one situation, I talked to this one guy, and he said, yeah, that's interesting, because when he first got married, he said, it's a deal breaker if you don't take my name. That's it. It's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
And I said, that's interesting. Why was it a deal breaker for you? And he's like, you know, it's because if my wife didn't take my name, then my dad would think I'm a really weak human being, and he would never he would think less of me. And then
Mm.
he's like, hmm, what, I never said that before. So,
Yeah.
it was, and then he was able to think, well, you know what? That's not true. And so it was that fear that was just like, oh my gosh, if my wife doesn't take my name, my dad will think less of me.
Yeah.
But when he could stop and think it through, he's like, wait a minute, my dad's still going to love me. And my dad shouldn't be making the decision what my wife and I want to do. So
Yes,
it
exactly.
was really, it, it is, it is important to have those conversations. I mean, it's kind of the same thing with, having kids. I mean, when do you talk about, do you want to have kids or not? Most
Mm.
people would think it's kind of more in the dating phase, because if somebody says, hey, you know what, I do not want to have kids.
Yeah.
What, that could be a deal breaker for the other person if they want to have a family and they want to have children. So, um, I think, right now, because there's still so much hidden emotions under the married names, that to me, it's better off the earlier you can talk about it, the better. And, and it doesn't have to be a really hard, serious conversation. It could just be, well, my husband, I'm remarried now. My husband and I, before we got married, it was around the dinner table. It was just, I was talking to him. I just said, hey, you know what? I don't think I'm going to take your name when we get married. And, but to him, that was the first time that he had even thought about it. And so it kind of took him back a little bit. He's like, oh, I just thought you would take my name, which is what I hear from a lot of guys, because that's the way our society has raised everybody, just thinking, oh, well, I just assumed you were going to take my name. And, but not only were he and I getting married, but because this is our second marriage for both of us, we're buying a new house. We're moving all of our kids in together. We have 6 of them now all together.
Brady Bunch.
No, because there's no Alice, so it can't be the Brady Bunch.
I have a friend who's similar, where they've got children from both their marriages, and now they're having one together as well.
Oh,
so,
okay.
So,
Okay, yeah. We didn't go there.
They're not 6. It'll be 5 with the new baby, but it's like, it's interesting how that works today. It's lovely.
Right. But just having the conversation around the dinner table and saying, it's not that easy. I don't want to take your name, and then, because now we're going to have kids together. So half the kids will have, your name, and half the kids will have my name. So I just like, I'll be not me and my kids were a team, and him and his kids were a team, but we're all just one team together. But we just had two different names, and, but I did mention to him, I said, well, if you want, you could take my name, kind of threw that one out there. And he said, I was really surprised at this. He said, I don't want to take your ex-husband's name. And I'm like, oh, I never thought of it like that, because I had my first marriage, I was 21. So, my entire adult life, I had this last name. So it was my last name and my identity that I had built up. It was on my college degrees and bylines and Facebook, things like that. So to me, it was my name. But as soon as I said that, he associated it with my ex-husband, like he would have been taking my ex-husband's name. So I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. So I told him I didn't want to take his ex-wife's name either. But he's like, what? He didn't quite get that, because, he just didn't associate it with it. And then I said, well, we can go back to maybe a name that is in my family tree. How about Schultz? Because I'm German. And he's like, I'm not German, I'm Irish, because he's Irish, and he had an Irish name growing up. But I like, well, isn't that interesting? Because I'm not Irish, I'm German, but I have an Irish name. So, it was just kind of that. And this is just around the dinner table, it's just as we're setting the table and we're kind of just talking it through a little bit. But it was really, it was very revealing about how he felt about things and how I felt about things, and it was a bonding experience. Now sometimes if I use my credit card, he'll be called Mr. Murphy, and he just kind of laughs, and he's like, he called me Mr. Murphy, or I'll get called Miss Nyhead, and we just kind of laugh now, and we just think it's funny. But it's a nice bonding experience, and it was a nice conversation that he and I could really get to know each other, and on that level about that subject, and kind of explore.
That's what I really love about what you're doing. You're promoting this conversation. And as you said, having it earlier is better. And I personally agree with that, because the whole point of dating someone when you're starting to date is that your intention is to have someone that you want to spend the rest of your life with.
The rest of your life, right?
Most people's cases. I don't think there's maybe some people, date to have a short-term relationship, and then, 10 years later they say they're going to change. But I think most people want to have, it's the intention of a lifetime. And you'd want to find out earlier, because I have friends like who are, they're in their 60s and 70s, and they were arranged marriages, which was interesting because
Yeah.
I didn't understand the process of that. But listening to how their parents went through the process of that, it was actually
Right.
finding fundamentals that are aligned. So they were looking for family values and things where there was an alignment and connection and a
Right.
really core fundamental level. And they said that's what, from their perspective, really gave their relationship strength, because they had an alignment at that level. But their parents did all that research. In our
Right.
society, we actually have to do it ourselves and try and work out, is this person going to be aligned with us? Because
Uh-huh.
we focus a lot on the marriage and getting married. We don't focus on the relationship so much, of how are we going to relate to this person for the rest of our life, which can raise
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
challenges, as most
Right.
people will be aware. So I was wondering about, this conversation that you're having, and it seems to me it is important to raise it early, to talk about these things, and it doesn't have to be in a "what do you think?" It can be
Mhm.
like you say, over a dinner, or just talk about and go, "Well, this is something that I'm thinking
Let's
about."
explore.
Yeah,
Right. Right. Yeah.
and then you.
Well, and another fun story that I had is that a woman that I talked to, they didn't have that conversation ahead of time, and again, it was being left up to her to decide,
Mhm,
what she wanted to do with her name. But as soon as they announced their engagement, this in this particular part of the country that where she lives, monograms are really big. Where you have your three initials. The
oh,
initial of
okay.
your first name, your middle name, and your last name.
Yeah,
And so, as soon as they got engaged, her soon-to-be in-laws gave her a monogram sweater with her new initials on it,
yeah,
just assuming she's going to change her name. And she's
yeah.
like, well, wait a minute, I haven't decided yet. But then she's in this position. It's like, well, what do I do? Do I not wear the sweater? Do I give it back to her? And so, but they were really big on monograms. So a couple months later, they gave her some napkins with her new monogram. So she finally had to be like, you need to stop, and she was kind of getting upset with her fiance too, because he's like, oh, that's just what my mom does. My mom just, she's really happy you're joining the family. She wants to give you gifts. She's into monograms. And so he was kind of like not really supporting her, and she just felt
Mm,
more and more anxiety, like, what am I going to do? What am I don't know what I'm going to do. So she kind of felt even more pressure. Well, I guess I'll just take his name because everybody expects me to. It's going to be really difficult if I don't. So she ended up taking his name. But it was that pressure that she felt she was really being forced into it.
but isn't that something that would have come up? And I'm not sure what happened with their relationship, and I don't want to put any hexes or anything on them as well. Hopefully, they do have a long, happy relationship. But as we were talking about before, and you mentioned this, the that pressure about
Mhm.
coming from not having the support of the partner,
The
and
partner, yeah.
having that discussion earlier might have, and it said hopefully their
Yeah,
relationship works out and everything's all okay. But it's
me
kind of,
too.
I'm hearing that and going, that's an indicator that things, if they don't fix things, it could get worse and it
Uh-huh.
could lead to a separation.
Mhm.
Whereas if she'd had, let's put it in a hypothetical situation, so we're not hexing anyone. um,
Okay.
but if we had, if you had that discussion early, and you might go, well, actually, that has the potential to cause a lot of risk, as to whether
Mhm.
our relationship's going to succeed. And
Mhm.
I think, because I look at it and go, well, there's, was it 7 billion people on the planet? Roughly half of people. So the chances are this is the only person you're ever going to be able to relate to is probably not the case.
Uh-huh.
And as you know,
Right.
we know, a lot of people get remarried and have very successful, second marriages. Um,
Mhm.
and having that discussion early might be a good way of identifying, well, there's a lot of risk here. Is
Uh-huh.
this something that a path I want to be going down with, or should I be exploring other options?
Right.
Is that, something that's worth, do you think is would be more helpful to creating a more sustainable relationship, identifying this risk early and deciding. 'Cause I look at it from, and I'm getting a little bit long-winded here. The relationships I've had that didn't work out, and certainly the marriage that I was in that didn't work, all the problems were there at the beginning, and I chose to ignore them. And that's not saying either person was a bad person. We would just never design, and I wouldn't go back and change it. We have a wonderful child together, and there's a lot of things that we did, but there was also a lot of angst with that as well. Now, the person I am today, I'm looking at going, well, everything was there at the beginning. Would I do that again now if I had to start afresh? And it's like, well, I would make a different choice. Because I'm paying attention. And I'm just wondering, having those conversations earlier, is that more likely to lead to a much more happier and long-lasting relationship?
Right. I think, any conversation that you can have ahead of time, helps to get to know the other person, especially if you can both be very open about your own feelings and go deep enough into your own feelings and be willing to be a little bit vulnerable with yourself and with each other. But I think it also leads back to a point that you made before, that a lot of times, or I guess I shouldn't be so generalized, but people are just so focused on getting married, and the wedding part of it. And again, our society certainly has its hand to play in that. Disney princesses and there's so many women that I've talked to that they've had their vision board, their wedding vision board on Pinterest ever since their parents would allow them to get a Pinterest account. So it's more about it's like they have the venue, they have the dress, they have everything. Now they just have to find the guy to go with it, So, interestingly, though, sometimes I have found that with some women, that kind of keeps them stuck in the older traditions because, like, they don't want to mess anything up. They really want to get married. They really want to move on with their life, and there's so many people that and they do it for love, and it's the best thing for them. But a lot of times when you're in that first long-term relationship, how do you know that that's like the right one and the best thing? It's kind of hard to tell. And then you throw on this whole, and I'm going to have a party, and it's all going to be about me, and so sometimes they don't want to have some of those hard conversations. This is what I found with some of the women that I've talked to, because what if he does get upset, or what if it is a deal breaker for him, or what if and again, sometimes they haven't gone deep enough in that fear to find out that at the very bottom, like, the fear is, but then what if he leaves me? And what if he doesn't love me anymore? But in reality, it's probably not the truth, but the fear is just like right here. So instead of going deeper into what does it really mean, they're just like, everything's good, I'm happy, I'm happy to take his name, I'm happy to give up my name. And they kind of like, they kind of what's that word I'm looking for? They kind of put themselves down. They say, my name isn't as important, or I'm happy to give up my name, give up part of my identity because I want to make him happy, and I want to have this whole big picture of my vision wedding Pinterest board. I want, everyone's smiling and everyone's happy. So sometimes some women that I've talked to, again, that's part of the fear. Is like, well, if I really look at how I feel, then it might mess up the whole vision board. So it's easier not to go there.
And that's an interesting point that you raised, though, because it can create a false sense of you're doing the right thing. If you have this outcome that the vision board of the wedding and just focused on the wedding, and draw from a number of psychologists that I know that work in the space, and it's very common where after the marriage breaks up, she will say, he's such a good dad, but he wasn't a good husband. And then when you delve deeper, which they did, but what they've told me is that her focus in getting married was finding a good dad, which she did.
Uh-huh.
But she didn't find a
Uh-huh.
good husband. Um,
Right.
and because they're a different thing. And that's where I love the fact, and I'm going to draw from my mum here, who always talked about relationship. A strong relationship is going to come from communication, having the ability to communicate. And I love this
Right.
foundation you're creating of talking about things that could be difficult. And so, because to
Mhm.
me, that's something, if you're going to have a relationship that lasts, there are things that it's not about the day that you've got married. That's lovely, and
Right.
that happens. And then 20
Uh-huh.
years on, that was 20 years ago, and you've got 20 years
Right.
of times 365 days
Right. Right.
that you've got to work through challenges, and life changes. It's one thing when you're single, and if you haven't been in a relationship before, if you're young, you don't have children, that kind of thing. So
Uh-huh.
all you're dealing with is, you'd have a career, and you're getting married, and holidays, and going out with friends. That's
Uh-huh.
being very um, generalistic in the description. But
Mhm.
as you move forward, as you have children, that changes how the dynamic of your relationship works. And if you don't communicate
Right.
about that, there's things
Right.
deeper within the relationship. I mean, sex is a big thing that's affected by children.
Uh-huh.
Those kind of things. How do you talk about it? How do you make that adjustment? And if you haven't planned for that, if you're just focused on the day, um,
Right.
so how do we move forward with that? And I said that's why I love how you're having these discussions, encouraging people to have those discussions. The other thing I wanted to talk about in that regard is the identity component of that. And I
Mhm.
focus a lot of times, and when we're certainly in negotiation, the negotiation magic course that I teach with corporates, we look at
Uh-huh.
how to separate the person from the behavior. Because a lot of times, a person will act a certain way. They might act really gruff, but they're not,
Mhm.
they're actually a kind person underneath. That's just their style of how they go about doing things. How
Mhm.
much of identity, I mean, a person's self-worth, should they link to their name? Or should it be a case of being able to separate the two? Is that, because you part of what you talk about, the big underneath of what you're talking about is the self-worth and being equal to that of a man. How much of
Right.
that, when we talk about that identity, should we even link to our name? Should our identity
Mhm.
be separate from a name, and it's just a name that
Mhm.
we have for legal reasons?
Yeah, you know what? I think it's such a individual decision,
Mm,
and I've talked to people who, their father is estranged from the family, so his name that has been attached to her at birth,
mm,
really doesn't have much
mm,
weight on her because she doesn't know that family.
yeah,
In fact, my stepdaughter, she has her last name is her mother's ex-husband's name. So
yeah,
she actually has no relation to that family, of the name that she has. She doesn't know anybody in that relationship. She doesn't know the family history. So to her, that name, it's the name that people have called her all
yeah,
her life, but beyond that, she really doesn't have any connection to it.
yeah,
And then there's other people, women that I've talked to, who said, I'm definitely keeping my maiden name because I'm very close to my family, or because I'll be the last one with this name. So I think it really has to do with uh, individual choices and individual decisions, and then when you actually reverse it and say, well, if your name, actually, it does have a lot to do with your own identity, but then when you reverse it and say, well, then, asking the guy, well, can you give up your name? And
mm,
again, there's then looking at it from a different perspective is like, well, there's a lot in his name. Like my husband, he's like, but I'm Irish and my name is Irish, and it's
yes,
it's my dad's name, and it talks about his clan, and everything. So he has a lot of
mm,
um, identity tied up in that name, and then again, with society raising women and men, to say, hey, a woman's name isn't worth that much because she's going to change it anyway. So, we kind of have that to fall back on too. But hopefully, I mean, it is starting to change. It is starting to, well, the latest statistic is about 70% of women still drop their name and take on their husband's name, where only 3% of men change their name. And usually that's because he's hyphenating his name with her name. So he's legally changing his name to have the hyphenated name too. But
where does that stop? I mean, if you have one generation where you've hyphenated, then the next generation, is it like a double hyphenate? And
right. I know that's the
I'm
new
being a little
thing
bit
that people are
facetious there,
dealing with. Like, what do we get? Right. Well, we got they call double-barreled name here, and we got a double-barreled name there. And now what do we do with it?
Exactly.
So, and you're seeing different people do different things. Again, one woman said, well, I'm going to keep my mom's name, and he's going to keep his dad's from his dad's family or whatever, and then they're going to hyphenate it again. So they still only have two last names, but they had to decide, what to do, or so it's a completely personal decision between each individual, and now hopefully between each couple, just kind of giving people more opportunities to explore this scenario together. I realize it's a very niche area of gender equality, but it's one that so many people still cling and hang on to. The other thing that's starting to change it too is the same-sex marriages. Because when you have, two men or two women, and when they get married, they don't have that male dominance over women kind of lingering in the back of them. It's two women or it's two men, so they don't have the gender inequality. So they just have a situation where they have to decide: do we both want to keep our names? Do we want one family name? And so they're kind of really blazing that path of, let's come up with a new name, or let's do something that really identifies who we are. But with the heterosexual couples, there's still somewhere in that mix, there's still the whole gender inequality, and that the man's name and his family history and his worth is more important than the woman, because of the whole patriarchal rules that came over from Europe, and that women lost all her own. She didn't, once she got married, she was not considered a person. Like, she had no rights. She was she didn't have rights over her body. She wasn't allowed to say no to have sex. She didn't have rights over her children. Like, if he left her or something, he could take the kids with. She had no rights to own property. So way back then, it was very unequal. We're getting much closer to being equal now, but some of those ghosts from those coverture laws are still kind of haunting around in our society.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because a friend of mine did a study here, and it was about the Italians that came to Australia many years ago after World War II, and he was studying how, because what you mentioned is from Europe, these things came over to America and have stayed. Right. Whereas, again, I mentioned friends from Cuba, but also friends that I recently saw from Spain. It was just normal for them that they maintained their own names. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a discussion. That was just their culture. So their culture had evolved. And it's interesting how, as you talk about it, it's lingering in America, whereas where it originally came from is completely evolved. And my friend did the same sort of study where the Italians that came out to Australia after World War II, they maintained this culture, which was their old world culture, whereas Italy moved on. And when a lot of these people went back to Italy, they're going, these people are so almost disgusting how free they are. They're wearing no clothes, and it's like, how could they do that? And they were mainly because they were isolated. Well, I would say they isolated themselves. They didn't evolve with what their actual roots had moved forward with. And
Uh-huh.
that's why I love how you're having this discussion to go, hang on a minute, the world has moved forward. It's like we're not
Right.
living
The
that way.
laws have changed, the customs have changed. So we have this new opportunity to change with it.
And what I
And
sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the part that you're really promoting there is for women. If you have this feeling that you want to talk about it, that you should talk about it, that it's okay to talk
Mhm,
about it, that it's important to
mhm,
talk about it, and that's
mhm,
part of what we're moving towards. And I think this is really fundamental to an egalitarian society, that both parties feel that they can talk about it. And certainly, I would be looking at it from a relationship perspective. If you bring it up and the person doesn't want to talk about it, that's where you should start questioning, should I be in this relationship? Um,
right. Or helping them to, dive a little bit deeper and to find
yeah.
out what that really is about. I did I guess I don't want to call it a study, but a fun game for part of my presentation. Where are you familiar with the TV game show called Family Feud?
Yes, yeah,
And
yeah. We had that
yeah,
here
okay. And
many,
there's
yeah.
there's the two teams, and they
Yeah.
survey 100 people, and the top, five, six, whatever answers are up on the board.
Yeah.
So I thought that would be fun to do that with guys, to find out what's the top five or six reasons why they don't change their name, and just to
Mm,
kind of put that information out there, and just, what, you know, would you be willing to take your wife's name, and before I went, before I collected all the research, I thought it was just more because they're going to say, because I don't have to, because
mm,
it's tradition, because I don't want to, kind of more a stubborn aspect of it.
yeah,
And I was really surprised to see. I think the number one was tradition. They just say,
yeah.
well, it's tradition. That's what we do.
Yeah.
It's haven't really given it much thought. But the third number one reason is because they said that, well, she didn't ask me to change my name.
Mm,
So kind of like they'd be willing to, but it just wasn't presented to them.
yes.
So there's still that thought, I guess, or again, the inequality that it's the woman who has to, I mean, don't get me wrong, this is wonderful. Women have the option because they have so many choices, but that she's the one who has to initiate it. So part of this whole conversation is to very slowly, get it to the level that it's equality. We have two names, we have two people, we're coming together,
Mm,
let's both come to the table. And, again, we have to decide, where are we going to live? It's not his decision, or it's not her decision. It's our decision to go look at houses together, to look at the neighborhoods together.
mm.
So it's come together with the names, and it's just both people coming together and making that decision together. So my dream is to have 50-50 by 2050. 50% of men changing their name, 50% of women by 50-50. I think it's going to take probably that long, but and again, it's not like there's any right or wrong answer. I mean, if,
Mm.
if you want to drop your name and take your husband's name, great. If he wants to drop his name and take her name, great. Or come up with a new name or whatever. But
Because what I
it's
hear
worth
from
a
what you're
conversation.
saying is that it's, as you say, when you're talking about getting married, you talk about,
Mhm.
where you're going to live, where the wedding's going to be, all those kind of things. But one of those things
Mm.
that's not on the checklist is, what name do we take, and what your mission is to have that on that checklist, rather than the woman having to raise it. But it's just a standard
Mhm.
thing. That it's one of those things that
Right.
we discuss. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Where's our venue? Where are we going to go on our honeymoon? What are we going to do with our last name?
Yeah, and as part of that too, when we look at the the um the history, I don't know if you can hear. I'm sitting where I'm sitting at the moment. I'm looking out over because I down near where the beach is, and I've got a couple of birds sitting there. I normally feed them. They're crowing at me, going, "Where's my food? Where's my food?" So we talked about dogs before. I
It's
don't have
breakfast
them as
time.
pets, but they come for food. But is there a case, because there's a lot put forward that from a stereotypical point of view, that the women are more agreeable, that they will go along, and whereas men are not so agreeable. But is it a case of also helping women to say, hey, this is what I want? I know, listening to a couple of quite prominent marriage counselors talk about it from the perspective of, in a relationship, it's important to say what it is that's right for you, not to assume the other person automatically knows. And that goes for both sides. So is it a case where, again, we're having that conversation going, this is what's important for me, and being able to have that conversation as well?
Yeah, right. And again, because of the way society has raised, and again, it's the way that our culture has raised both men and women, that we've come to this part. It's nobody's fault. It's just, this is the custom that we're raised in.
Yeah.
And but I think I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Well, I was just wondering, from that perspective, should we be asking, we encourage both people to again talk about what's important for them and have that
Oh,
conversation,
right,
and rather than
right.
just assuming the other person, because it seems to be, as you say, you mentioned before about with the monograms, the lady
Hmm.
going, well, it wasn't really what she wanted, but she just went along with it. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah,
Because
so it,
she didn't want to disappoint, her future mother-in-law. She wanted her future mother-in-law to like her, and,
mm,
to be right. Um,
it,
one other thing that's kind of interesting is that, as far as like, I was trying to figure out, like, when kids kind of learn
mm,
um, that women change their names, and it's hard to say exactly when. But I asked a friend who taught kindergarten, and I said, so if you ask your kids in kindergarten, like, why do women change their names when they get married, what do you think they'll say? And she just laughed, and she goes, kids in kindergarten, they don't even know that their parents have names. They just think their mom and dad, those are their names. They have no idea.
yeah,
So she said, ask the fifth grade teacher. So
mm,
I asked the fifth grade teacher, and she polled her class. And so the kids in fifth grade, they knew, like, why do women change their names when they get married? And she gave me a spreadsheet, and she didn't have names on there, but it's like I could tell which ones were the boys' answers and which ones were the girls' answers.
yeah,
And there was a lot of because the man's the head of the house, and so the woman has to take his name, or
mm,
because my name is cooler, so she should take my name, or so it was things even at fifth grade, kind of, you could, like, the boys felt their name, or they were more important than the girls or the women.
mm,
And the girls pretty much said, well, there used to be laws. In the past, women didn't have a lot of rights, so
yeah,
they had to give up their name.
mm,
So I thought it was interesting. Here, fifth grade is like 10 years old. And so already boys are like, boys are a little bit better than girls. So girls have to give up part of who they are to,
yeah.
and again, this is the society that we live in, and it's just interesting to pinpoint about the names and how that has affected people that way too.
Yeah, because I'm really fascinated by that from the perspective of, I mean, what I'm curious about, is there any studies which, when you compare what's happened in, say, because I mentioned Spain and Cuba, but there's a lot of countries that were originally like that, which America has modeled itself off, and not just America, but other countries, but then have since moved on from that. So as I said, if you mention to
Done.
my friends from Spain or Cuba, and a number of those, there's a couple of other Asian countries as well, about taking the other person's name, they go, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That they just wouldn't even consider that as being normal. But
Right.
originally in history it was, but today they just don't even recognize that. It's like it never occurred. But I'm just wondering,
Right.
has there been any studies working to just go, well, okay, in Spain it was like this, and this is what led to that change. Is there anything like that available? I'm curious about that.
You know, I don't know about studies, but I do know that there have been some laws set in place.
Yeah.
I'd have to look up in my research to get the exact dates, but there are some as recently as in the 1970s, or
Mm.
you know, pretty recently in the last 100 years, that the government has set laws saying, you know, women cannot change their name, or women have to keep their birth name, or you know, everybody has to keep the name on their birth certificate for, you know, for different reasons. So
Mm.
I think the laws have a lot to do with
Yeah, good
shifting
point.
the culture,
Yeah.
where, you know, ours in the United States, we, like I mentioned before, we worked hard, or the women worked hard to get women to have the option to keep their name,
Mm.
um, when they got married, but there was no law saying you have to keep your name. We didn't go that far. We're still into choices.
Yeah.
Everyone's got a choice. But they did do a study as recently as 2017 here in the United States. You know, a small study. And I can't remember the exact person, or how many people were involved, but she found that 50% of people in the United States feel that women should still take the man's name. And
Mm.
of that 50%, another, you know, 50% of those people felt it should be a law that the women should have to take the man's name. So that tradition
25%.
of women taking the man's name is still, and again, I don't know the demographics of it, so I don't know if there were
Mm.
older people or younger people. But when she delved a little bit further into it, they felt that the woman should take the man's name because, they still felt that the woman should, her highest priority should be taking care of her husband and her children,
Yeah.
and so they felt that she should kind of sacrifice part of herself, I guess, and
Yeah.
take his name. So there's still that tradition is still pretty strong, but it is changing. I mean, there's the younger generation, you know, they're much more accepting of same-sex marriages, of um, um, you know, different sexual identification, so they're not so stuck into this is how it should be, or this is how
Mm.
it's always been. They're much more open to evolving. So I
Yeah,
think,
I mean,
yeah.
I completely agree from the perspective of doing something just because it's always been done is not a good reason for doing anything. Um,
Right.
in my that's my personal view.
Right.
And if that affects,
Especially when it holds groups back, or even worse, if it harms them, you
oh,
know,
definitely, it should never be the
by
case in that
holding them
regard.
back. Right.
Yeah. What
So
about
it's,
I was going to say, what about creating a family identity? I mean, I have friends, and we had this discussion when we brought some people together to talk about, you know, issues family have, and we were filming
uh,
this. And one of the things that came up, we were talking about family identity. And it wasn't about choosing the name, but it was about, you know, family identity, creating that tribe and that sense of, you know, we're one
right.
unit. And
Family,
the
right.
lady, yeah, she said we're family, and but she used the example with her kids, or I should say their kids. It was saying like we're Coopers, we have a higher standard that we hold ourselves to. So it was like it was creating
Uh,
this tribal thing to create a standard by which the children behave. Now, from the
mhm.
perspective of if you've both got separate names, what are the ways people can create that family identity rather than just being focused? Because we mentioned about identity before, and I personally have concerns about linking your identity to an external thing. It's like an athlete saying, "Yeah, I'm a
Mhm.
football player," then breaks their leg, can never play
Right.
again. All of a sudden, their self-worth is
Right.
completely gone.
Right.
What other ways can we create this sense of self-worth, sense of identity for the family rather than being around the name? Are there other options that people could do?
Uh-huh. I definitely think so. I think, you know, it's, um, making new traditions. You know, again, we talked about how traditions can evolve. So making new traditions, for example, this isn't so much about having different names, but my brother and sister-in-law, they have kids of their own, and then
Mm.
they adopted 7 kids. So now they have 10 kids. But anyway, one
Wow.
of the first things that they did, not all at once, but one of the first things that they did is that they got a bigger size van so
Mm.
they could make sure that they all go together. And it wasn't like, okay, you 3 older kids, you go in this car with mom and you guys go over
Mm.
here. They felt it was very important for everybody to be included together and everybody treated the
Yeah, I
same
love
way.
that.
So I don't know, that's a little thing like that. And I do have another friend, she and her husband, again, they each had separate kids and they got together, and kind of like you were mentioning, they had a child together,
Mm.
but their whole thing was, yeah, now we're just one big happy family, and
Yeah.
we're let's it wasn't like, okay, this is how it was done before on that side. So anyway, just coming up with new traditions to involve everybody, start something new, and I think um, that helps a lot. The other thing too is
Mm.
diversity, and like you said, there's different cultures that
Mm.
have different ways of doing things. At my work, I was talking to a lady who is she's of Muslim background, and so, and again, in that background, the women keep their names. They don't feel
Mm.
marriage is a reason to change your name. But
Correct. Yeah.
then when they have a child, the child, the couple comes together and they decide. Um, I don't know all the details, but they choose like maybe a little bit of each other's name and put it together. So
Mm.
basically, the family has 3 different last names. She has her
Yeah.
name, he has his name, and the child or children have this name that they've
Mm.
created for them. And I said, well, isn't it kind of hard, like in school or medical records going through the airport? And she's like, no, we just, you know what, that's the way that they grew up. That's what they know. So they know they have to have certain paperwork, or they have to have certain
Mm.
identifications. And that's to her, that's normal,
Yes.
so I think having that kind of diversity around too, and having, it's not everybody doing all the same thing.
Yeah.
It kind of opens you up to different ideas and more acceptance of things that aren't so straight and narrow and always been done the same way.
Yeah, well, I completely agree with that. I mean, I've one of my business partners, he's from Iran, and his wife's Iranian as well. But yeah, their culture is exactly that. They don't take the other person's name, and they do a
Right.
combination for their daughter's surname. And
Okay.
it's just normal. Their identity isn't
Right.
linked to the name. Their identity, as you mentioned, is linked to the behaviors of how they relate to each other and how they interact as a family. So
Right.
it's quite interesting that there's so many places around the world that this is commonplace, that
Hmm.
that people will they don't link their identity to their name, their surname to start with. And
Right.
the woman,
Right.
and certainly the woman's identity is not linked to her taking on his name. So,
Right.
it's interesting. Again, I love the fact that we're having this discussion and opening up that, hey, this is what we're dealing with is quite archaic compared to what the
Uh-huh.
rest of the world is doing.
Right. And just, I think that's one thing that kind of drew me to this too, is just how um stringently some people just cling to this tradition that this is the way it should be done. And I mean,
Yeah.
there's, oh my gosh, there's studies out there saying that, if a woman doesn't take the man's name, she's not as committed to the relationship, she's too independent. And then there's
Is that
another
kind of like a study
relationship.
that says if you're playing basketball, it makes you taller? So I do wonder
It's
about some of
almost
these studies, and you look at the research behind it, and you're going, wondering about the questions you've
right.
asked here and that.
Like,
Is
I
it
think you
biased?
can probably find the answer you're looking for if you kind of shape it enough. Right.
Yeah.
Or there's studies saying that men who take their wife's name are weaker, and the woman is more dominant. And, but again, it seeps in. And there's this actress, Zoe, and quite a few years ago, and her husband just came right out and said, well, their fiance at the time, hey, I'm going to take your name. And she's like, no, 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 you can't. What will your friends think? They'll, she was afraid that he would be, I don't know, bullied or teased, or he would be emasculated by
Yeah.
taking her name. But again, she was able to catch herself. She was able to catch that fear in herself and say, well, wait a minute. He doesn't care. He doesn't seem to be concerned. Why am I concerned? And is he really going to be less of a man because he takes my name? And so she was able to, catch those thoughts and catch
Yeah.
those fears and say, think I don't want to have those anymore, and she was able to change them. So I think that's the most important thing, is to catch those fears and really examine them and decide if it's still necessary in your life. And if it's not necessary anymore, then just say, I don't think I'm going to have that fear anymore. Let's
Yeah,
move on.
I love what you've just said then too, because isn't that the ultimate fear, of being worried about what other people think over what's important for you? And
Uh-huh.
that's just, when you think about your own self-worth, if you're more worried about what other people are saying about you rather than what you think about you, your self-worth can't be that high.
Uh-huh.
If you can
Well,
be that.
that, or it's hard to try to figure out who you really are, because
Mm.
you're so in tune with what everybody else is thinking.
And
And
that's what I
again,
really.
with social media, with television, with
Yeah.
everything else, it's hard to, um, well, I didn't grow up with that. I grew up in a time when I was a little bit quieter, from no social media. So, but you need that time to figure out what are really my thoughts, as opposed to what
Mm.
are everybody else's thoughts, or what's being put on me, but what I should be or what I should look like.
Yeah, and I really love that, what you were talking about with um, the husband of the actor saying, "Hey, this is what I want to do. I don't care what the rest of the world thinks," and it's
Right.
really important. I personally believe that's really important if we were going to grow self-actualized individuals, is that people they know what they want is right for them, and they're able to express
Right.
that in it. And it doesn't have to be done in a in an aggressive way. You can express what you want
Right.
quite quite comfortably. Um,
Hmm.
okay, so we probably should. What I've also noted here is you talked about tips for conversations. What are
Uh-huh.
practical things people can do? Because this is, I think, not just from the perspective of talking about the name side of things, but I would imagine the tips are also helpful just for having conversations about any difficult topic. So do you want to share some of
Right.
those tips that you've got for helping people have good
Uh-huh.
conversation about changing their name?
Sure. Yeah, I think the most important thing is for the two people to have that conversation first, and then coming to an agreement together, and then going out into the world as a joint as a joint unit, saying, hey, here's what we've decided, and kind of doing that together.
Yeah.
So it can be as little as something like I said to my fiance at the time. It's like, hey, I don't think I'm going to change my name. Just like kind of throwing it out there to start the decision,
Yeah.
or
Rip the Band-Aid off. Is
or
that what you're saying?
it's a thought I've had.
Exactly.
Or some there. Oh my gosh, almost definitely every month, if not every week, there's articles written about this whole married name topic, about why more women are keeping their birth name, or why more men there's just so many articles out there. So I mean, another
Make a
tip might be
scrapbook of
just,
all the articles and go, "Here."
there's
As I
too
told.
many. There's just so many out there, and
Really?
people have
Wow.
comments about them. Sometimes, again, some people are just so stuck on their, like, no, this is the way it should be,
Yeah.
and not really willing to open up to other things.
Are
But
you a
another
stubborn
tip is,
person like this? Read an article, and are you this stubborn?
okay,
I'd like to know before we take this relationship further.
yeah, that may not go over so well, but it's an option.
Yes.
But you can say, like, hey, I just read this really interesting article. What, it's saying, whatever, and what do you think about it? Or hey, I heard one of my friends just said they're going to do this, or whatever. So just kind of like maybe throwing the topic out there a little bit, or
Mm.
just to, and not to say here's what I like and here's what I think we should do. It was
Mm.
more just like, I found this really interesting, what do you think about it, a way to start conversations. And because it's not like one person is right and one person is wrong. It's just, we
Yeah.
have these options, we have these choices. I have my opinion, you have your opinion. Let's share opinions. I may be a little bit naive there, like, but I think, to have a good open conversation, a good open relationship, it's important to be able to have these conversations where you're just sharing opinions. And of course, there's always I I know when I first got married, I was married in a Catholic church, and there was, pre-Cana classes. So there was, you have a
Yeah.
third party person there kind of helping you out with some of the things. And in fact, that's a really interesting part that I found too, is that I thought, being raised Catholic, that, the Catholic institution would maybe not require, but frown on women who
Mm.
didn't take their husband's name. But then when I did some research, there's, I shouldn't say no religions, but the majority of religions, especially Protestant, Episcopalian, Catholic, some of the bigger institutions, they're like, what's important is that you love each other, you have open
Mm.
conversations. What you
Yeah,
choose to do with
exactly.
your name is a personal decision. So none of the religious institutions that I checked in with, they did not have a a preference on whether a woman took the man's name, the man took the woman's name. They both kept their own names. That's not what was important. What was important was the loving relationship and why you're
Mm.
getting married, and having open conversations. So I thought that was interesting.
No, and that's an interesting point because people do twist that. I mean, the religion
Mhm.
doesn't mandate that it be one way or the other. As you say, it's more about the higher principles of, do you love each other? Can you communicate? Are you intending to stay together for the rest of your life? Because it's till death do us
Right.
part, certainly. And I grew up, I'm Polish, Ukrainian origin with a little bit of Russian in there, so I could be the peace talker
Okay.
at the moment with, because I've got all three.
What's going on?
But it's and so I have that Catholic upbringing as well, and it wasn't. It was about till
Right.
death do you part. How are you going to do that? It wasn't
Right.
you must take that name. And I'm just
Right.
wondering too, like, because we, as you say, talking about that, having being able to have that conversation, we keep coming back to this fear, people having a fear of
Uh-huh.
having that conversation. Um,
Uh-huh.
and it's because I look at it from, obviously I'm male, and I have male thinking, in the sense of, I'm okay with people telling me what they want. So, like, if
Uh-huh.
my partner tells me and says, I want this, it's like, oh, cool, thanks for telling me, and have the
Right.
discussion. And I'm just wondering,
Uh-huh.
is that something we also need to put out there, that it's certainly from that perspective where if a woman is concerned about bringing up, she's worried that she might upset him, that generally guys are okay with you telling us what we want, what you want. It's more when you try and make us work out to do a mind reading,
Right.
we get confused and go, I can't work it out. Just tell me what you want.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, and like I said, when I interviewed all those guys for my little Family Feud game, I was surprised that it was a lot of men were actually open to the idea, but it was
Mm.
more, well, she didn't ask me. She didn't. I again, they just kind of assumed she was going to take his name, but it never came up that, hey, I'm not sure I'm going to take your name, or I would like to, I would love for us to sit down and have a conversation about all the different options. There's 6 different options, and let's have a conversation about each one of them. And um yeah, I can see your point though, that I think some women may be afraid to bring up the conversation because they're afraid that the man may get upset.
Mm.
um so of course I'm promoting for the men to start the conversation.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a combination of both, where, as you say, we were talking about before about having it on the checklist. Okay, we're going to get married, we're going to have a house, we're going to have this kid. You have these things you're going to talk about, the name being one of those things on the checklist. And the other side of
Right.
it too is, and as you're promoting, is let's be able to have this conversation fundamentally, because it's not just about the name, but if there's a difficult topic that you want to talk about, communication is important for the longevity of a
Hmm.
relationship. Being able to put that fear aside,
Right.
and say, well, this is what I would like to, or I'd at least just like to discuss it. Um, and
Hmm.
and I think from that perspective, when a person can confidently say what it is that they want, what's important for them, it certainly, if they're in a loving relationship, the other partner will be open to listening to that, regardless of whether it's about the
Right.
name or not. Um,
Right.
what I'd hope it would, because if you can't have those conversations, your relationship's in a lot of problems.
Right.
Uh,
Right, exactly. And like anything in a relationship, it takes two,
yeah.
on both sides, right? If the woman, if this is something really strong to the woman, or I think that's part of my project too, and my initiative is to get women to say, "Hey, you know what? Your family history, your name, your is just as worthy as the person you're about to marry."
Mhm.
So I mean,
Definitely.
again, it's a personal decision. If you want to drop your name and take his name, that's fine. But kind of do some self exploration. Kind of like, how would you feel if he took your name? Or how
Mm.
would you feel if you guys both had kept your own names and you gave the children your name? You know, it's such a different concept that like when I've asked some women that, some of them get giddy, like, I'll give my kids my name. That's really exciting. And then other women are like, ooh, I would never take that away from the guy. Like it's kind of like you're
Mm.
taking something away from the man. So again, there's just so many hidden emotions and stereotypes and unconscious biases hidden in there that it's just so fun to bring them to the surface and
Yeah.
and kind of look at them in a different light.
Yeah, I love that. And the part that I think is most important, well, for me, that I'm hearing is most important, is this part about self-worth, where you're
Mhm.
thinking that your name is worth less or you are worth less. Um, and that's something I really I love with the work that you're doing, is to promote that. No, we are, and that's the whole point of what eShare is about. Let's create an egalitarian society. You are as
Right.
equally
We're
worth.
equal.
Correct.
Right.
You say it's an
Hmm.
individual choice, but we're doing it from a basis of equality.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
What are some
Hmm.
of the funniest, because we'll start to wind up, because I know we've gone on for a bit, which is, there's been so much exciting stuff to talk about, which is why we've had this long conversation. I love it. But
Yeah.
let's, on a lighter note, what are some of the weirdest reasons people have said for not changing their name that you've heard?
Weirdest reasons.
I was gonna say
I
stupidest, but I thought weirdest is probably more PC. Now that I put it out there.
Right. Right. It's not so much weirdest reason. It's yeah, kind of more like stubbornness, kind of like, no, it's my name. I'm not giving it up, or
Yeah, I'm
or
gonna put that under stupid.
um
I can do that. People can complain about it, I don't mind.
right.
Being
Right.
stubborn
But
is not
or else
not a good, yeah, sorry, continue on, I'm
but I,
interrupting.
I think a lot of um, definitely guys, but even a lot of women just haven't considered the
Mm,
option of I can't believe how many people until like 2021, 2022 are still saying we never even had the conversation. We just
yeah,
both assumed I would drop my name and take his, and we just never even had a conversation. And and sometimes that's fine. It works out fine. Other people, I say, it kind of built resentment in our relationship, kind of like, well, why
mm,
did I have to, later on? And because people are getting married later in their life too, they're like, oh, wait a minute, this is like a huge shift. Now all of a sudden I'm not Mary Smith, I'm Mary Jones or whatever. And just having
mm.
people call you that name and feeling that kind of loss of part of your identity. So I just think it's basically people just say, well, why would I change my name? This is the way it's always been, for
Yeah.
guys, or women too. Just like, no, I'm all in this marriage. I love him. I'm happy to drop my name and kind of follow that traditional path of that's what a good wife will do, kind of a thing. So
That's what I love about this conversation, though, is that because for a large part of the world, this is archaic type thinking. It's like it's just not done, and it's kind of when you look at every because you look at everything that America has achieved and things that it has done. Yet there's certain parts of it that are so far in history that the rest of the world has moved on, but it just seems to be
right.
clinging to this one thing.
Right, just clinging, hanging on to it, like
Yeah,
this
it's
is
like,
the
"Oh, I
right
gotta
thing
get
to
this
do.
through, and
It's like, really? No, just loosen up. Have fun with it, Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. Have fun with it. That's the point. It's
Mhm.
not it's not
Mhm.
so I wonder what it is that stubbornness, because you mentioned stubbornness. What is it
Yeah.
about this need to hold on to that, do you think?
Right. You know what? I still think there is part of the again, if you compare heterosexual couples with same sex couples, there's something about gender inequality, and
Mm,
that our society still sees the man as like the head of the household, or the protector, or the one who's like worth more because he has more money, or he has more something or other.
mm,
Be- Simply because in a same-sex marriage you don't have that gender inequality. I mean, you
mm,
may have personality inequalities, but you
mm.
don't have the gender inequality. So and again, things have changed. Women are in the workforce. There's plenty of women who are the breadwinners. There's plenty of guys who choose to stay home, take care of kids. Again, we have options, we have
Yeah,
choices. And so but that whole name thing is kind of is kind of archaic, because it's kind of still keeping the whole the man of the house is more important than the woman
yeah. It's
part.
interesting as well having those discussions because, I mean, I look at it again from that equality perspective. I know so many people. There's some friends of mine. His family is all here in Victoria, which is where we have her family's from Tasmania, which was connected to Australia, but about
Uh-huh.
30,000 years ago the bridge sunk. So Tasmania is this little island now, and but her family's there, and they had a talk about it, and it was more important, that for her to be near her family. So he left all his friends, all his his family, and they moved to
Hmm.
Tasmania. Now, admittedly, that's not that far, but similar sort of thing, where the Spanish family that I was talking about before, I mean, he worked in the automotive industry here in Australia because they were both here in Australia, um, and then he got an offer. He was poached by Tesla, went to work in California, and they spent a number of years there working there, and he was traveling a bit, and then it was become really difficult. I don't know the economics there, but she said it was difficult cost wise. For them to continue, she felt it was difficult cost wise. So they had that discussion. She wanted to move back to Spain with
Hmm.
because they had one child together, and they talked about it and they said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And he actually said, so from a career perspective, that was effectively career ending for him
Hmm.
because Tesla's based in California. Um,
Yeah, can't really work
and
from home like there.
and then yeah, so but they said no, this is what we're going to do, and then he actually went to Tesla, and Tesla said, yeah, no, we will support you working over there. But the fact that
Oh,
she
really?
brought it up, so yeah, and
Right.
because of there's a factory near in Germany or something like that, so he
Uh-huh.
goes there for which is not far from Spain, so he can fly up. The distance is a little bit different in Europe than we're used to in Australia and America.
Right.
So changing countries is not that big a deal. So he flies up to Germany for a couple of days and then comes back and does the rest of the work from home. And
Uh-huh.
they were accommodating of that, but she had they treated their relationship as equal, that both needs were equal,
Right.
and were able
Right.
to have that discussion. So, and it's nice to see,
Hmm.
this is where I love what you're doing. You're promoting this conversation about, the name is a symbol for, we are equal. That's how I'm
Right.
interpreting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's
You're
using that
correct.
we are approaching it from an equal perspective, and we should have that
Right.
conversation. Am I understanding that right?
Yep. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. Just coming at it from an equal, uh, level playing field. There's all these different options. Let's come together and let's decide what's best for us. And right, what's best for one couple is not going to be the best thing for another couple. But the important part is that they're doing it together. They're making that decision together, just like your friends were about the whole job and living situation.
Yeah.
What's best for them.
Yeah, and that's what's
Hmm.
going to create
Right.
harmony in a relationship. What are some of
Right.
the funniest moments that you've experienced going through this process that you've learned from?
I think some of the funniest things are some of the names that well, I brought up Grosswinger before,
Yeah,
and the with the surname history, a lot of things came from either where somebody lived, like Atwood, so that's somebody
yeah,
who lived at the woods or by the woods, or their occupation, like
a butcher,
what was it?
a butcher.
There, right.
Yeah,
Right, butcher, right, baker, smith, something like that, or sometimes,
I always wondered what John Hancock did, but
right, and then you got Grosswiener. It's like, really, what was that about? I don't know.
exactly.
But
What did that person? How did they end up with that name? Yeah,
right, and so I have another funny story. So I have a girlfriend who she so her fiance, his last name is Dam, Damm, and which could be the dam in the water, but it's also
yeah,
dam. And it turns out that her sister actually married his brother, so like two sisters were marrying two brothers, and her sister hyphenated the name, so is she hyphenated Dam into her name, but then she complained about how it was really cumbersome and blah 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 blah. So my girlfriend did drop her name, which is a perfectly good Irish name in my opinion,
yeah.
and she took on Dam, and I just felt that was really unfortunate. And they went on to have three kids and sent them to a Catholic school. So I always laugh thinking the principal saying, "Well, the damn kids, please come to the office." It's kind of like you got to kind of think about, like, really, do you really want to pass this name on? And it's no disrespect to a family, that
No,
you don't want to pass a name on, but again, she had a perfectly good Irish name. Why not take that name?
yes, yeah, no, that's a good point.
Um, yeah, yeah, it's just fun, and again, because we have choices, different things that people have done. One of my friends said that, she did take her husband's name, but she said, if I fell in love with a guy, her first name is Mary. And she said, if fell in love with a guy that his last name rhymed with Mary, like Scary or Barry, she goes, there's no way I would have taken it. So it's just kind of some fun things that people come up with. And
Yeah,
some of the names out there are just really kind of, I found something on Twitter one day about a lady saying her last name is Medic, and so she's like, okay, I know I'm in a club here of people with unfortunate names, and the list of names that came up there, and they're like, it started causing problems because they'd put their name in, and it would constantly be auto corrected, so it wasn't a profanity name, or they use it
yeah.
as their username, and it's like you cannot use a profanity name or something like that. So it's just some fun stories like that.
Yeah, well, it is an opportunity to, like you say, to make things a little bit easier from that perspective as well, and avoid some of those issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we're
Hmm.
going to wind up here. What would be some of your key wisdoms that you would pass on in respect to this, like one or several, in respect of having the discussion about changing the name, about creating more equality. What are some of the key
Mhm.
wisdoms that you would like to pass on before we wind this up?
Right. Yeah, I think one of the key wisdoms, or the what I would love to see, is for all women to negotiate her name.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of going a little bit stronger than saying just have that conversation about your name, because like you were mentioning, it's important for each person to decide what they want and what's
Mm.
important to them. And then if that's important, it's it's good in a relationship to have that open conversation. I mean, if you say, I tried, I told him that, he should take my name or something. He just said no, or he just kind of dismissed the whole idea. You know, don't let it go there. If it's really important to you, if it's going to cause resentment or cause
Mm.
a rift in your conversation or in your relationship later on, fight for what's important for you. And again, not like it's a game changer or it's a deal breaker. If you don't take my name, then I'm out of here. But just, you know get him to listen to you and get him to say, hey, this is really important to me. Can we talk about, what are your feelings about this, or what are your underlying fears? And then once you do decide on a name together, go at the world together, be a united front, and find an appropriate time to tell the parents on both sides. Find a fun way to announce it to everybody, and instead
Mm.
of just when you invite people to your wedding and they're like, well, who do I make the check out to? I don't know if people still write checks at weddings, but is it his name, her name, whatever? But be creative and find fun ways to announce it, kind of like the gender reveal, how that all went popular with, is it pink or blue, whatever.
Yeah.
Find a fun way, a name reveal, a way to have fun with it, and say, hey, here's what we got engaged, here's our new name, and
Yeah.
so people know.
Love
Yeah.
that, love that. That's
Mhm.
so fantastic, and certainly
Mhm.
fundamentally deep for people to
It is.
latch onto. That's awesome. Melania, it's been so wonderful having you on the program and to talk about how to create an egalitarian society. Love the work that
Mhm.
you're doing. It's been wonderful.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's great to talk to other people who want the same thing, gender equality and egalitarian, like you said. This is great. Thank you.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes for others and for you.